Morning to you all. This is a webinar navigating ESG reporting. We'll be going through a practical approach to CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive from the EU. We'll be explaining all about that. But I'd first like to introduce the speakers today. We're very lucky to have Liv Banfield, our team, presenting today. Liv is Senior Analyst and Impact Manager at Action Sustainability. She's been continues to work with major organisations across the UK in implementing robust reporting mechanisms and frameworks across their organisations to align with their ESG requirements and also align with their sustainability strategies. She's an expert in turning reporting data collection into action and into improvement. So, Liv, good morning to you, and thanks for joining. We'll be hearing you a little bit later on in this session. I myself am Charles Nord. I'm Head of Product at Action Sustainability. I focus on helping organisations to implement a software solution that helps to streamline ESG reporting and data collection. Again, with the view of really sort of focusing on, well, how can we use reporting to make impact and to ensure it's not just a tick boxing exercise, but that it's about improvements. We don't forget that we're here to try and become better at sustainability. We're not just here to report. So Liv and I, as a duo today, will be bringing some of our knowledge and experience, but obviously focusing in on corporate sustainability reporting directive. A little bit more background about who we are and what we do. Liv and I work for an organisation called Action Sustainability. I'm just going to pause there because I see that someone's mentioned that there's some audio issues. So just want to make sure that not everyone is experiencing that issue on my audio. If maybe my colleagues can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So sorry, just a little technical pause there.
It's fine for me. It's a little bit tinny, but not. I can hear you perfectly.
You can hear me perfectly? Okay.
Yeah.
I'll hold the microphone closer to that. A couple of people are saying it's fine. So thank you very much to those. Apologies to the individual who's not hearing me clearly. I'll hold the microphone closer to my mouth. Hopefully that improves. So thank you. End of technical pause. Let's carry on. So as I was saying, Liv and I, we work for an organisation called Action Sustainability. We're based in London, in the United Kingdom. And as an organisation, we offer a comprehensive three-pronged approach to advancing sustainability within our client organisations. First of all, we help through education. We've got a major program called the Supply Chain Sustainability School, where we provide free CPD accredited training, resources, etc., to upskill your workforce and your supply chain around all topics in sustainability. And really, the Supply Chain Sustainability School is also acts as a community and as a forum for continuous learning and improvement and sustainability awareness. Second, we have the sustainability tool, which is a software platform for helping to measure, collect, and report sustainability. Essentially, there we focus a lot on organizations that have reporting requirements and also that have complex supply chains and help them to streamline the data collection processes around that. Finally, our business is also made of a consultancy team where we provide tailored consultancy services to really help our clients and handhold them through all their sustainability journey, from developing your strategy to actually implementing production programs and so on and so forth. So it's got sort of quite a broad spectrum. And again, now as an organisation, we've got a good reputation. And we do a lot of work around sustainable supply chain management. So that sort of tends to be a key area of focus for us. And notably, we actually are the organisation that led the UK delegation for the Sustainable Procurement ISO with the ISO 2400. And as a business, we support a wide range of sectors. We do have a core focus on the built environment, so construction, infrastructure, property, facilities management. But we've also worked with organisations and continue to do so across the board. Lots of work in health, pharma, and aerospace, and um, fast-moving consumer goods, and so on and so forth. And we, as an organisation, we're really proud as well to have been honoured in 2022 by having received the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Sustainable Development. We're the only sustainability consultancy to have received that award. So I think that's recognition of our hard work and dedication and our passion for all things sustainability. So that's you know who we are and why we're running this webinar today. But let's focus on the topic at hand. The sessions around navigating CSRD. So we are really, we've got an hour. So what we're going to do is try to focus on the key, the most crucial information, so that you understand what the CSRD is. So CSRD is the European Union Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. I'll repeat that a couple of times. The next slide is explaining what this is, what CSRD is. So we'll explain what it is, who it applies to, what's changed recently, importantly, what you need to do to comply, and also how you can ensure that benefits sort of beyond compliance with CSRD. So I guess, you know, whether you're completely new to CSRD or you're already on your journey, hopefully we'll give you some practical insights that you can take back to your organization. You have a much better understanding of what it is to do, or an understanding of whether what you're already doing is along the right tracks or not. We'll hopefully have time at the end for some questions, but feel free to pop them in the chat as well as you go through this. And I should have said actually at the beginning that we are recording this session as well. So if you miss anything, you'll have the recording after, and I'll share the slides as a follow-up email. So you have those. Let's jump in. Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. What is it? What are we talking about? So we're actually talking about a really massive piece of European Union law that's essentially trying to raise the bar around how companies report on their sustainability performance. The core idea behind it, the core sort of concept or principle is that the European Union believes that businesses should be able to report just as transparently, just as accurately, just as diligently all their environmental and social impacts, and in a way that's equal to how they today can report their financial performance, right? So I'm sure if I go to many of you in your businesses and ask, you know, how much did you spend on fuel, you can tell me that to the penny for last year. You've got that in your accounts. It's really tightly managed. And you've got principles and policies around how you manage your finances. The intention is that we do the same around environmental and social impact. The Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, it was adopted in 2022 and came into force officially in January 2023 by the European Union. A little bit of background, which is what the right-hand side of this slide refers to. This is taken from the European Union website. And we look at the CSRD within the lens of what's known as the European Green Deal. The Green Deal is the European Union's overarching strategy to transform its economy for a more sustainable future. It covers everything from energy, buildings, mobility, pollution, biodiversity, food systems, and so on. And at the heart of it is the idea that we must tackle the climate crisis and environmental degradation, while also creating economic opportunities and ensuring what's known as a just transition. The concept that we can be more sustainable, but leaving no one behind, making sure everyone's got the tools and opportunities, and that it's applied fairly in a way that we can bring everyone together on this journey. And so the Green Deal is that concept, right, of becoming a more sustainable European Union. And the CSRD is a way of making sure that this happens. And the way that it makes sure that this happens is around reporting. And reporting is around transparency. It's around understanding, well, where do we have impact? Where do we have risks? Where do we have challenges? Where do we need to make more efforts? Where are we actually having really positive impacts, and therefore we can sort of focus our investments on that to do more of it. And ultimately, it's sort of helping businesses have a framework to have corporate accountability around their sustainability impacts. Now, so as I've said, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, one of the key drivers is this European Green Deal strategy, and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is around reporting and transparency, and the benefits of that entails, right? Just a note for anyone who's aware of this or might have heard it before, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is actually not necessarily something new. It's actually replacing a regulation that was already in place called the Non-Financial Reporting Directive. But that was a previous regulation around reporting with sort of similar overarching objectives. However, that previous regulation was done in a way that was much, I guess, narrower on scope. It impacted less businesses, and the detail and the level of sustainability reporting required within it was much more simplified, less specific as a result, and also, it wasn't detailed and it hasn't been widely enforced. It's still in place. This other regulation called the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, NFRD. Apologies for the acronyms. They all come from the European Union. It's awful, but we need to live with that. But essentially, it's still in place, but it hasn't really been enforced. And so, the changes, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is something that comes and supersedes that existing regulation. We'll talk about the timelines, what it is in more detail, what it actually means. But essentially, it's got I guess two key components. First of all, it standardizes how companies must report using a reporting framework called the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And also, it introduces concepts like double materiality, digital reporting, external assurance, etc., which we'll talk about. We'll explain what all of that means. But it just introduces these things, so it becomes much more specific than the old regulation is. And the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive is really, it covers everything that you could imagine around sustainability. It's really, really detailed and broad. It covers things like climate change and carbon emissions, to human rights, biodiversity, workforce diversity, anti-corruption, and so on and so forth. And it provides nice detail around standardization, and it helps therefore to provide comparability, and it just becomes a really useful tool once we'll have the reporting underway. I am going to skip over this horrible slide that I put together. I must apologize, but essentially this is meant to be sort of just a list of the definitions. I've tried to simplify as much as possible what all these terms and references are. We're going to try and stick away from them as much as possible, but you can refer to that later on. If you read more about CSRD, you might come across some of these terms. Hopefully, this will be really useful. What I'll do is I'll just pick two. I'll pick two. So the top one and the bottom one. The top one is CSRD. This is what companies must report. This is what we're talking about today. It defines what you must report, what you must do. Essentially, if you follow the CSRD guidelines, you will automatically be essentially following all the rest, the EU taxonomy, the CSDDD, and so on and so forth. What I'm trying to say is, don't really worry about them in a way. Focus on CSRD. Some people might say that's not the right approach, but if you're starting off, it's really important that you just grasp the core concepts. And naturally, once you go into more detail, you'll explore these other concepts afterwards. So for the time being, just focus on CSRD. The other point that I want to bring up is the omnibus, which was the last point there, and that is a proposed change made by the European Union. So the European Union put the CSRD into law, but now they've proposed a change to it. And right now that change, that omnibus, is being assessed. And so we're in a bit of a phase of uncertainty right now in terms of that change, whether the proposed change will be accepted or not. My view, my understanding from what I've heard is that it's likely to be, the proposed changes are likely to be accepted, and I'll explain what those mean. The good news, I guess, from a compliance perspective, is that the proposed changes have basically watered down the initial regulation, the initial law that was CSRD. It's been watered down. That's, I guess, some good news because it means that you've got less compliance obligations. On another hand, if you're a firm believer that CSRD is a good thing, you might say, well, that's a bad thing. It means that the EU is sort of backtracking a little bit on its sustainability commitments. That's the truth. So, you've got to, just understand that wider concept. So, CSRD, I've been talking about it. Who does it apply to? So first of all, it's a European Union regulation. So by default, you can imagine that it doesn't apply to UK businesses. I say that because actually sustainability we're based in the UK. So on the face of it, the core of it, that's in some ways true. So first of all, CSRD applies initially to large EU companies, over 1,000 employees, and over 50 million euros in annual turnover, or 25 million euros in assets. Very simple. However, then that's where it gets a little bit more complex, and that's where it might apply to organizations like in the UK who are outside the Union. If you are an organization that, your head offices are not in the EU, you might not consider yourself as a European Union company. However, you have significant turnover in the European Union. So you have over 450 million euros in turnovers, it's quite large, and at least one EU branch or subsidiary, then you are subject to this regulation. There is also SMEs, small medium enterprises, in the EU that are listed. There's a bit of a question mark around those because of that omnibus, that change that I talked about. But it's seemingly listed SMEs in the European Union will be also required to comply with CSRD, this reporting requirement, but it will be a lighter touch, and it will come in at a later date, those requirements. And there's a bit of a question mark around that at this stage. So there we go. And I've talked about the omnibus, right? That sort of change that's been proposed, it's being reviewed, and we're sort of waiting on the European Union to make a decision on that. So some of these things might change slightly. What we've done is we've interpreted what we think will happen. If you've got more questions around it, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to sort of give you more insights on that. So just to recap, what does it mean for UK businesses? Well, we've identified on the previous slide for the UK businesses that, and actually any organisation that has over £450 million turnover in the EU and at least one branch or subsidiary, you'll need in the EU, you will be required to report on the CSRD in 2029. So you'll be submitting data for 2028 in 2029, right? Because you're reporting, you do it retrospectively. However, you should also consider, some of you might say, well, that doesn't apply to me yet, so that's it. I don't need to worry about CSRD. What I would just say is a word of caution is that you have clients who fall within this criteria. And those clients, when they go through the reporting, when they go through all the documentation, they will require information from you. So you'll be indirectly impacted. So it's a good thing that you're familiar with the type of information and what is required, because it's likely, if you're in someone's supply chain, that this will impact you indirectly. Also, the UK government is considering a UK version of this, UK version of CSRD. There's still no firm plans yet. We were meant to hear last year in 2024 about this, but it's not come out yet. It's likely that we'll hear something around sustainability reporting regulation in the UK in the coming years. So it's only where things are going. So there we go. So hopefully that gives you clarity in terms of what CSRD is, high level. It's a reporting regulation, and who it applies to: large EU businesses, and then potentially SMEs in the future, and then also non-EU businesses who've got a large presence in the EU, to put simply. We'll move over to my colleague Liv right now, who will actually take us through the steps of how to comply. So if you see that, right, I actually fall under these criteria, or I'm just interested in these, in what the next steps are, Liv will tell us what those are and what you actually need to do. Obviously, we've got an hour so for this webinar, so it's giving you a high level information about that. But over to you, Liv, and then I'll pick up later. Thank you.
Charles. So yeah, I'm going to take you through how to comply. So whether you're in scope or you'd like to get ahead, what you kind of actually have to do to comply with CSRD. And there's 5 key steps which I'm going to take you through now. So the first one is double materiality assessment. So this requires you to carry out a double materiality assessment. This means looking at sustainability from 2 different angles. The first angle is financial materiality. So what environmental or social issues could affect your company's financial performance or long-term value, for example, like flooding. And then the second angle is impact materiality. So what impact does your business have on the environment and people? These can be both positive and negative impacts, for example, water pollution. So you're not really expected to report on everything, just what is material to you, but you need to have a clear process to identify and prioritize those topics, and you also need to document the outcomes. This is sort of a foundation for your whole CSRD report, as it defines what you will include and won't include throughout your report. So in practice, you need to define a list of sustainability topics you're going to assess. Where we kind of start with is there is some guidance documents provided by CSRD, and they're called the ESRS. So it's the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And these cover some core areas and some like topical areas. Some of the core areas, for example, are climate change, energy use, water and pollution, workers in your value chain, like ethics, and any affected communities. So then what you need to do is sort of map out how each of these topics could relate to your business. And you can kind of do this by asking yourselves 2 questions sort of to begin with. The first one is linked to financial materiality. So how does this issue impact your business? And then the second one is linked to impact materiality. Do we impact this issue through our operations or does our supply chain? The way that you can kind of engage with these topics are you can use interviews, you can ask stakeholders for their input, you can look at things like industry benchmarks or any previous reports to help you kind of answer these questions and gather more information. It's really important that you do engage stakeholders. We do this to understand the real world impacts and risks. And that's why it's so key that you speak with both internal teams, such as like the finance department, sustainability departments, HR for those workers sort of questions, and the legal teams. And then also, you need to engage external stakeholders, such as your customers, your suppliers, any investors, as all of these sort of key stakeholders can help you assess how relevant each issue is to them and therefore to you. And it can also help you uncover risks or any expectations you hadn't yet considered as you're getting much broader opinions and perspectives. So, how do you then prioritize them? The way that you do this is you need to like score them. And a typical way that you can do this is using a matrix, such as the one you can see there on the right-hand side, which has financial materiality on one axis, and on the other one we have impact materiality. And here we've just got some examples of how the stakeholders who've engaged with how important they deem different areas and different topics. The topics that fall in the upper half of either axis should be included in your CSRD report as like a general rule, as they're deemed the most important to your business. So once you have prioritized, you kind of need to document your process, and CSRD requires you to explain kind of how you decide what is material. So you need to explain how you conducted your double materiality assessment. You'll need to describe who was involved, all the criteria that you use, and how decisions was made. And this will show any regulators and auditors that your reporting is robust, that you really engage with this sort of assessment, and you really have like analysed the data to see exactly what is applicable to you. So next slide, please, Joss. Oh, anyway, I'll carry on. So once you've identified your material topics, the next step is to collect the right data. So this is where CSRD starts to get quite detailed. So you'll need to gather both quantitative and qualitative ESG data across your own operations and, where it is applicable, your value chain. So this can include things like carbon emissions. You'll need to include scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And as we know, scope 3 is mainly in your supply chain. Social data, such as your workforce demographics, any training that you run, and health and safety topics. And then governance data, so looking at your business ethics, anti-corruption things, and due diligence processes. So there's one very important part, as there is some specific data that you need to collect that is determined by the ESRS. So we're going to go into that in more detail on the next slide, but it's just worth noting that the data you gather throughout all of your reporting needs to be aligned to the ESRS disclosures for each topic. It needs to be structured and complete. You need to make sure that you're covering all the requirements, the required metrics, any narratives they're asking for, and any forward-looking information. And where possible, your data needs to be based on reliable sources. Even if you're starting with estimates, you kind of need to justify why you're using those estimates as well. And it's especially important when it comes to your value chain data. So, for example, as I mentioned a moment ago, scope 3 emissions, your supplier emissions, or any like social risk data, where direct data may not always be available straight away, you need to be shown and describe the method that you use to collect that data. Maybe it's proxy data, maybe it's sample data, and then you kind of need to show how you're then encouraging and supporting your suppliers, for example, in collecting more accurate data moving forward. So I guess the key message here is good data collection starts with knowing which ESRS disclosures are material to you, and then you need to build on that accordingly. And this is kind of a step where a good data platform or an ESG data tool can really help you. It can help you centralize the data, collect clean data, and structure your inputs as well. So it can really support you in this area. So now that you've identified your material topics and you've started collecting data, it's time to structure your report, and that's where the ESRS comes in and supports you further. So the ESRS, as I mentioned, are detailed reporting templates. They were issued by FRAG and they're mandatory under the CSRD. So you kind of need to think of them as kind of like an instruction manual for what your sustainability report should include. And there are kind of two types of ESRS. The first one is the general standards. These apply to everyone and they cover things like your sustainability strategy, your governance and oversight, risk management, and any policies, targets, and action plans you already have. So you'd include those in the general standards. And then there is the second part, which is the topic specific standards. So this is depending what's on material to you when you did your matrix. So these cover things like climate change, pollution, biodiversity, your workforce data for you and across your value chain, and maybe something like business conduct and ethics. So you don't have to report everything that is mentioned in ESRS 2, but only what's material to you, but you need to make sure that you're doing this robustly because once a topic is in scope, you must use the relevant ERS structure to basically complete your disclosure. And these can include quantitative metrics, such as like tons of CO2e or workforce turnover rates, and then also qualitative descriptions. So stuff about policies, risks, any plans to mitigate risks as well. Also includes time-bound targets, so they want you to set targets with the specific dates in mind, and any forward-looking information also needs to be included. This kind of ensures consistency and comparability between organizations, sectors, and countries, which is a real core goal of CSRD. They want to be able to look at the data and compare different companies on the same topics, as a lot of frameworks and standards currently don't have prescribed methods, and therefore it can be quite difficult to compare different organizations' reports because they report in different ways on different things. So this really supports the like by like comparison. So the CSRD isn't just a reporting template, it's sort of the framework that ties everything together, your materiality assessment, your data collection, and then also your public disclosure at the end. So the next slide is about sort of getting your information assured. So once you've completed your CSRD report, you need to get it assured, just like you kind of would with a financial report and data. And this is linked to the CSRD's goal of making those sustainability reporting as robust as financial reporting. That's something they really, really are aiming for. So, under CSRD, assurance is not optional for now. It's only required for a limited assurance level, but this is still formal and it's a regulated process. So, kind of what this means for you is you need to get a limited assurance, basically, you need an external provider. It's often a financial auditor or another accredited body to sort of review your sustainability report. And what they're doing there is they are checking that the data is plausible and it's free from any obvious errors, that the process you use to collect and report the data is sound and robust, and the disclosures are internally consistent and aligned with the ESRS. So that's why you've got to use that as sort of a framework to build off. It's less intensive than a full audit, as they're not going through every single data point and verifying every data point, but it still requires a very clear audit trail for having documented controls as well and cross-functional collaborations across sustainability, finance, and legal teams. So that all needs to be super clear in your report so that it can be audited correctly. So the goal here is to build credibility with stakeholders, whether it's any investors, regulators, or your supply chain. And over time, the EU does have plans to sort of raise the bar with CSRD, eventually like moving it from limited reasonable assurance to making it kind of be like a full financial audit where they are looking at every single data point and really, really getting into the detail. So this step is really about future-proofing your process well, do it well now, get in a good habit, get your methods in place, and that will pay off in the future, as you'll be like compliant completely. And then the final step in CSRD compliance is to publish your sustainability report, and this is asked for to be done digitally. It isn't just uploading your report as a PDF to the website, hosting it on there. It requires more than that. The EU requires it to use you to use a machine readable format, specifically something called XBRL, which stands for Extensible Business Reporting Language. This kind of is a system that is used by financial reporting, and the idea of it is to make the ESG data easy to compare, easy to analyze, and easy to regulate. So it's all hosted on the same system, and it could easily be read by the system. So in practice, it basically means that every data point in your report, from the emissions data you've reported to the diversity metrics, they all need to be digitally tagged. And this tagging process allows a standard taxonomy defined by the EU. So you're kind of following that standard. And then once your report's been digitally tagged and uploaded, you then submit it through national platforms, which will be designated by each EU member state. And these platforms then feed into a single point. It's the European Single Access Point, which is like called the ESAP. And it's basically this central EU-wide database for corporate sustainability reporting and financial information. So they'll all kind of be housed and hosted there. And that's sort of like the end point of CSRD reporting, is when you kind of submit it to that platform and it's all hosted there. So I'm going to pass back to Charles, who's going to speak about timelines now, because they're coming up quite fast.
Thanks, thanks, Liv. And I'll just summarize that if that's okay. There's lots to take in there, and you've sort of summarized it really well. But nonetheless, there's lots to take in, and that's just the reality of this complex, heavy, really forward-looking regulation. But essentially, you know, as you were saying, you start off with your double materiality assessment, and that's about understanding, well, what matters to me, what matters to us as a business. And that's very much the same exercise you do to carry out a sustainability strategy, right? It's exactly the same thing. So that it's just helping you formalize that process, right? And they give you sort of directions, tell you, you need to write down what process you went through to get to that. So it's really good because it's best practice when you put together a sustainability strategy. So you're sort of benefiting from complying with this here already, because you're getting sustainability strategy in sort of the best practice way. And then you go off and you collect your data. Then you I mean, it sounds simple. There's lots of processes there, and we do lots of other webinars and workshops around that and provide support on that. Then you go into making sure the data you've collected aligns with the ESRS standards, which is the ESRS standards is embedded in CSRD. So it's just you're aligning to CSRD essentially for a simpler description. Then you get limited assurance, so you don't get fully audited, but you get someone to review the data, someone who's accredited to review the data. It's not a deep dive audit, but they do a lot of sense checking, verifying the data. And then you publish it, and we've been told exactly the format that we need to publish it in. So that's quite helpful guidance, right? And it's not leaving anything to interpretation. So thanks for that deep dive, Liv. Very helpful. I will now move on to timelines, but before I do, there was a really interesting question that came up while you were speaking, Liv. Well, actually, while I was speaking, I think, because it was relating to something I didn't clearly say. So, and it's someone asking, well, I receive investment from EU banks or EU companies. So what does that mean for me? Well, it doesn't actually directly imply anything for you. However, that bank or that company investing in you as a UK business, they might be subject to CSRD, or actually investors. There's a separate regulation, and I listed it in my definitions there's a separate regulation, which is the SFDR, Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which is another, it's essentially an equivalent, I'll simplify it, an equivalent of CSRD, but for financial institutions in the EU. So they're probably going to be asking you for data. All right. So if you're a UK business, you've got investors or banks that you get lots of money from them, they invest in you in the UK. You're not direct, that doesn't mean that fact alone doesn't mean you're subject to CSRD. However, you might indirectly need to provide data for them so that they comply to CSRD. Hopefully that answers the question that we have there. So let's look at timelines. There's lots of information around timelines, and there's a bit of uncertainty around timelines because of the omnibus. Remember, the omnibus is that proposed change the EU has put together. It put that change together because it got feedback on CSRD when it first sort of talked about it. Where businesses were saying this is really, really complex and it's covering lots and lots of businesses. Initially, it was covering about 50,000 businesses. I think Liv mentioned it. That's been reduced in scope. It's been sort of watered down a little bit. And the timelines are being pushed back. So this is my best attempt, or our best attempt, at providing a timeline around CSRD. We know what happened in the past. The EU adopted this in 2022. It came into official law in 2023. But the law was saying, the reporting is going to happen in a few years' time. Now, the omnibus has proposed some changes. What we think is going to happen is that in 2027, we're going to get the first CSRD reports, but those are only going to be for organizations that fall under the criteria. And just to make it even more complex, for businesses that are already subject to previous regulation, the NFRD, which I touched upon earlier at the beginning, you remember I said that CSRD replaced existing legislation. That legislation is still live today. And essentially, organizations that are subject to that regulation today, NFRD, in 2027, they'll need to submit their first CSRD reports. They won't need to submit NFRD reports anymore. There we go. Now, that only applies to businesses that today already need to report to NFRD. One thing to note on the timeline is that when I say 2027, that's physically when they need to submit the report. But you do your report retrospectively. So you do, just like you do your financial accounts sort of at the end of the year, once the year's finished, you then take a month or two to finalize your financial accounts. The same thing happens here in sustainability, right? So 2027 means 2026 data, which means that organizations need to be putting in place the processes today to make sure they can collect the 2026 data so that they're in a position to submit their reports in 2027. Next, everyone else, every other EU company under CSRD that fell within the threshold at the beginning that we presented, but that is today not subject to NFRD regulation. It's all a bit complex, isn't it? We're trying to simplify it, but all of these acronyms make it difficult. So that's the next phase of businesses that will then be subject in 2028 to CSRD reporting. So there'll be EU businesses only that fall within the thresholds that I presented that weren't under NFRD, because the NFRD ones were captured in that first phase in 2027. And then finally, it's the 2029 ones. So that's when the non-EU ones, potentially when the SMEs as well come in. So if you are a non-EU company, but you still fall within the threshold that I presented around the 450 million euros of turnover in the EU, and you've got subsidiary in the EU, then you'll be subject to CSRD reporting. There we go. This comes with a massive caveat that the omnibus for change hasn't been accepted, and it's not been finalised. So there's a little bit of question marks around all this. But let's breathe. Let's pause a little bit. A lot of it sounds complex, and it can sound a bit overwhelming. So, it's detailed legislation. There's lots of acronyms. So I think, uh, uh, um, you know, we've just got to pause and breathe and understand that we're not expected to be perfect. And the most important thing is to get started. Do your best, document your approach, and think, how can I improve? That is also at the core of the CSRD requirements. It's all about get started, follow best practice, do double materiality assessment, collect your data, pour your data in a standardized process, get it get a light touch audit and then submit it in the standard in a common way, right? That it's about doing those things, right? But if at some stage there's one piece you can't do, or you don't have information, and so on and so forth, do your best. It doesn't matter. Document, explain why CSRD allows for that. It allows for certain aspects of uncertainty, and it allows for, it gives room for progression. Okay. It's just about actually getting on with the process, doing your submissions, and completing as best you can. And we know that we'll get better over time. There's a recognition of that. A few points. I guess a few points to consider. Now, of course, probably comes out. It's obvious. It's about organisation. It's about understanding where you are, what you already have in place, and improving over time. I've talked about that. I've mentioned the point of being pragmatic, right? Um, Also recognize that a lot of you probably already have sustainability strategies in place. You might have done a version of a double materiality assessment, etc. So potentially it's just about reviewing those and making sure you go through the proper process. But you're probably a long way along the way, right? Um, and on the right hand side there, just giving examples of where you can be pragmatic, particularly around the data collection. Um, of course, it's always ideal to have actual data, but if you don't have actual data, you can use proxy data, right? So actual data would be I need to report my consumption of fossil fuels. Proxy data would be to say, well, I don't have my liters of fossil fuel consumed, but I do have the amount I spend, and I can sort of estimate based on my spend how many liters that is because I know the price of a liter on average, etc. So I can do that. Um, or alternatively, if you don't have that, you go to sample data. So you just say, right, well, I can measure, I can collect my liters of fossil fuel consumed over a month or for a certain part of my business, and then I'll extrapolate what I think it is for the rest of it. Just document your methodology. That's fine. CSRD allows for that, right? So there is space there, as I said, for interpretation and for pragmatism and it gives room for improvement. Um, so there you go. We recognise that as a business, we really recognise that often there's intent around sustainability reporting and collecting data, but there's practical barriers. And we really believe that CSRD helps to address those. You know, around inconsistent methods and standards, which make it hard to compare or consolidate data. CSRD helps with that by default. Often, suppliers or stakeholders or teams have struggle, I guess, to provide data, to report, to get engaged, and CSRD sort of helps you through the processes, helps you to document and get standardization, which ultimately helps your supply chain. Scattered data, we sort of talked about consistency, but it's the same thing, across our organizations or across many clients that we speak with, they've got pockets of ESG data, but it lives in different areas, spreadsheets, contracts, and so on and so forth. Often that leads to sort of incomplete gaps in the data, areas where businesses struggle to take action and understand what they can do about it. And really, if you follow the CSRD process, it's going to help you address all these issues. And us as an organization, we've built tools to help with that. We've got measurement systems, data collection systems to help with those things. Notably, we've got a flagship Scope 3 measurement system that helps organizations when they need to collect carbon data from their supply chain, which can often be an onerous exercise, particularly when your supply chain isn't very mature on carbon. We help to bring the skill level of your supply chain up so that they're in a position to report. And we also actually give them tools, free tools for them to measure their carbon footprint and report that back to you. So we've got a free measurement tool for your supply chain for any organization, or actually maybe if you're an SME, for you to measure your carbon footprint. And you can use that today for free. In turn, you can help your clients collect their Scope 3 data, which is a major, major piece of the CSRD reporting requirements, and probably one of the trickier points in terms of data collections. Moving beyond carbon, we also do provide similar tools around equality, diversity, and inclusion, where we run on our platform the largest employee diversity survey in the UK. And we provide, we get really, really rich information on diversity practices, diversity performance across businesses in the UK. Last year, we got responses from over 450,000 employees. So for companies who represent 450,000 employees, even the ONS data on company diversity is much, much, much smaller than that. And then finally, aligned to CSRD, we also provide a completely bespoke reporting platform where we help to essentially take things like the CSRD or other ESG reporting requirements that you have, or even your sustainability strategy. We take that and we adapt our platform to really help streamline your data collection processes, your performance management processes, and your ultimate reporting requirements. Our approach is that we really focus on helping our clients to get started. We provide sort of modular and scalable solutions. So whether you're really far down your reporting and you just want to go sort of the extra level, you're looking for a partner to help you with that, we're there. Or if you need some hand holding because you're at the beginning of your journey as well, our solutions can really sort of tailor, from that less mature level, beginning your journey, to a really, really mature, complex supply chain type of environment. So, as I mentioned, everything we do aligns to sort of your company needs, and really one key thing that I think we're particularly strong on is and it's just something that everyone needs to consider when you're doing things like reporting for CSRD or just reporting your ESG requirements, is understanding what is the whole sort of stakeholder engagement exercise that I'm putting in place. And we do a lot of work on that. As I mentioned, the Supply Chain Sustainability School, for example, we often use that as a tool to help engage organizations or stakeholders that need to report, they need to understand regulations or what they need to do around things like CSRD within your network, right? So we can really help to sort of train up and upskill and inform through the school, and then having the reporting tool combined with that. So it really offers a full package there. So guys, we've got 5 minutes. I think I've just had one question for the time being on the content. And I've answered that. But I will gladly open up to more questions from anyone around CSRD, what's been presented today, what we do. On screen, you've got our contact details. You've got Liv's email address, my email address. You can also scan that QR code to book in a meeting with us to discuss your requirements, any questions that you have. We'd be very, very happy to speak with you. So I'll pause there and let you ask any questions. And also, I'll just take that opportunity to thank you for attending today. We really appreciate it. If you've got any feedback, also drop us an email. If you want to hear something else next time, drop us an email and let us know, and we'll run another session, different topic. Maybe go into more detail on this or anything you think you'd like to hear more of. So I'll wait around for a few minutes. Seems that no questions are coming in, but feel free to go off on your lunch if you haven't had that. Feel free to stay around and ask some questions. I'll wait for a few more minutes. And thanks again. And thank you to Liv as well. I'm so sorry. I should have said that. Very unpolite of me, but thanks to Liv for a great presentation. Really brought it to life. So
You're so welcome.
it. There's a question that comes in around decarbonisation and CSRD parts for construction projects. So um, I'll answer that to the individual who is asking that if you're still around, hopefully. So first of all, CSRD doesn't it applies to companies, doesn't apply to a project, unless the project is a corporate entity. Um, However, having said that, of course, activities that you do on a project are likely to fall under some aspects of the CSRD. So um, that's where what's known as the EU taxonomy, which comes in. That helps you to define, what counts as something, a green activity. So what counts as decarbonisation? Um, so there's you've got questions essentially when you go through the CSRD questionnaire. You'll have questions that ask you to exemplify what you've done about climate change and so on and so forth. But it'll also ask you your carbon emissions for all your projects, and then what you've done to decarbonize. So you essentially complete those questions, right? You go through the process, you complete those questions, and you explain what you've done there. But you have to refer to what's known as the EU taxonomy. It's often very well documented, right? Just to make sure that what you're considering decarbonisation aligns with the EU's definition of that. Hopefully that answers your question there. Excellent. I think we can wrap it up there in that case. So thanks very much to everyone, and do reach out if you've got any other questions, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.